Hey, friends, welcome. We need to talk a bit about the market again. The GDP is down, and some have taken this negatively. I also saw that the risk of recession in the USA has definitely increased significantly because of this. Many are talking negatively about it, but strangely, Bitcoin is still rising. However, this is the first quarter where growth is negative. The next quarter will be crucial because if we have negative growth for 2 consecutive quarters, then we would be in a technical recession. For those who don't know what GDP means, it's basically the gross domestic product of the USA. So based on these numbers, you can really see how much money this country continues to generate. This was negative on Wednesday, and accordingly, the risk of recession is rising. As I said, it's only a recession if we have negative growth for 2 consecutive quarters. But what you need to understand here is that this fear is deliberately created, in my opinion. I mean, even in 2008, during the biggest financial crisis we ever had, all the banks said, hey, we see a soft landing. What happened? A huge recession. This time everyone is expecting a recession. And I say honestly, then we won't see a recession. Why would we? If everyone expects it, then it won't happen. It's the typical scenario again. All the banks, they are always wrong anyway. Or rather, they release false forecasts. They talk about us going into a recession, that this year will be very bad, and so on. They do this deliberately. They manipulate you. You have to imagine inflation has decreased. That's already very good. The unemployment numbers in the USA are very stable. This means, macroeconomically, we do have this problem that we really had a bad first quarter, but economically, things still look good so far. It doesn't look like a recession. Most US companies have now published their quarterly figures, and they are actually even better than expected. And accordingly, we only saw this negative GDP in the USA because of these advanced imports, and not because of economic weakness. This must be understood. In my eyes, it clearly looks like we should be panicking here. Because, look at the company's quarterly figures. They don't look that bad at all. It was really all just because of these advanced imports by the USA. That's the only reason we had a negative GDP now. And I'll show you how it was in 2019, 2020. We really had very negative growth overnight. Back then, people also panicked here. We then slowly saw our peak anyway, in interest rates. After that, we also slowly ended this quantitative tightening. And when that happened, in 2020, you know what happened. Then came the monetary expansion. Then the global M2 money supply also increased massively. And it all builds on each other. What we are seeing now is unfolding just like in 2019, 2020, we had a trade war. A low gross domestic product. Rates were peaking. QT ended and M2 money is rising. So all of this slowly happened in 2019, 2020 as a result of these individual signals. And you also know what happened here then. We even had money temporarily taken out of circulation here. We had the Corona crash here, but then we had a massive expansion of money. Just look at this expansion of money here. How crazy it simply is. A tremendous amount of money flowed into the markets, and we had the biggest bull run ever. A people's Bitcoin season. Everything you need. All of this only happened because we had a trade war before, because people were panicking, because it was happening back then, just like it is now. It's nothing different. People are still panicking, yet the M2 money supply is slowly rising, and the likelihood that we will soon see a stop to quantitative tightening is also increasingly likely. And that is extremely important. Now there's this fear again that Pakistan and India might go to war with each other. Maybe there is fear that could very well be. I certainly hope not. But honestly, in my opinion, it's being blown out of proportion again. Because people are supposed to be afraid so that the market reacts differently than the people. Just because we've seen negative growth, interest rate cuts are becoming increasingly likely. And a loose monetary policy is also becoming more likely as a result. And that's exactly what we want in the long term. We want the fresh capital. And accordingly, it's coming slowly. Of course, it would be good if the next quarterly figures turn out positive again. But as I told you, these negative quarterly figures were due to advanced imports and not because the companies are currently not doing well. And this is important to understand here. If the companies had all reported poor figures in the first quarter, then it would really look like a recession. But what is happening here is not really manipulation, but it's just a slight distortion of the figures, I would say. And you can also see it. The money is flowing out of gold and back into the crypto market. So that is also very, very positive. Technically, I believe that if we continue in the coming days, and maintain stability, it becomes increasingly likely that we will see a breakout here and perhaps move towards new all-time highs, which is very, very positive and interesting. We are almost at 100,000 with Bitcoin and are still in the neutral zone. People are currently at $100,000 per Bitcoin and not even euphoric. How perfect is that? This way, the market manipulators can trick us much better again. Because if everyone becomes bullish again, the likelihood would increase that we fall deeper once more. But since that's not the case right now, it's very good, just like we currently also don't even have really great interest in the crypto market. Interest has generally declined significantly, even though we have risen so much again. What is also interesting is that Michael Saylor is currently raising 84 billion US dollars to continue buying Bitcoin with it for his company. That's already crazy. $84 billion. If that goes through, then we can definitely rise quite quickly here because, $84 billion, if that flows into Bitcoin within a few weeks, then we can really rise significantly here. Additionally, Eric Trump stated yesterday at the token conference in Dubai that he says the current SWIFT system is broken and we need an improvement. And this improvement should take place with cryptocurrencies. In this regard, you always have these ISO coins on the radar. It will be very interesting, but it's already nice to hear that they are interested in using these cryptocurrencies in real everyday life. We currently have a very indecisive market view. Unemployment claims are rising to $241,000 in the USA. Highest level since October, and we had 20,000 more claims than expected. That's really crazy, and one might think that's actually very, very bad. The problem is the Fed is just sitting in the corner here. Either they will lower interest rates and thereby relieve the citizens, but they might also accept a possible recession. And that's why it's currently so uncertain and no one really knows what will happen next. Additionally, we can simply see that these tariffs against China have been in place for a month now. And as he says here, it's quite clear what China is doing. China is by far not as dependent on the USA as the USA is on China. And China is currently biding its time. China is not under as much pressure as the USA. And accordingly, China is not backing down at the moment, not really relenting. And that's why it could get pretty ugly for the Americans in the coming weeks. Because the Americans buy and produce so many things from China, and things like that. That's why China is currently in a significantly better situation, and you can feel that completely. The Chinese are indeed willing to negotiate, but only in their favor. And that's another thing that's currently putting pressure on the market. Because as long as we haven't resolved this, it's just too unclear. I think the issue with the Chinese tariffs should ideally be settled first. Since we are currently rising again, we have slipped back into the positive with the MVRV score, which is extremely positive. Because most of the time we had a significant upward trend after we slipped back into the positive range here, at least in the past. I could imagine that we will stay in the positive range with the score at least until November, September. Remain in the positive range, staying positive here for months. It would definitely be conceivable, at least when compared to the past. That is definitely a positive thing, one must simply say it like that. Otherwise, feel free to write in the comments what you think will happen next. How should the Fed react? Should they lower interest rates, cut them, tackle a recession by doing so, or should they let it run its course? Should they inject money? Write your scenario in the comments here because there are currently many opinions and many opinions lead to different outcomes.